Hey, it's Dr. Greg Emerson. I'm walking in the Currumbin National Park, which is obviously a lot greener and wetter than where I've been working recently in the Queensland outback. And in fact, we've just had a massive cyclone pass through the area. So it's going to be very interesting to see how big the waterfalls are and how many trees are going to be down crossing my path. Today I'm going to talk about 3 new interesting published scientific papers. One is about the effects of microplastics on aging. Second one is about Astragalus, one of the great medicinal herbs of the world, and its benefits in cardiovascular disease. And the third one is going to be about why my skin goes white and red when I'm in cold water, which is called the hunting effect. But before I go on, can't see the waterfall. Before I go on, remember, currently after 6 years I remain suspended in nutritional medicine, can only work as an emergency specialist in a public hospital. So none, and I repeat, none of this is health or medical advice. It's provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. About to come up to my usual spa pool. You see how the spa pool's looking? Yeah, spa pool's flowing hard. Educational and entertainment purposes only, and does not, and I again repeat, does not replace advice from your own medical or health practitioner, which you should seek out if you have any questions about this. Also, please read the disclaimer about the video in the video description on YouTube. Now, before we start on those 3 papers, it's interesting to note that all 3 of them involve the mitochondria. So before we start in on the 3 papers, I thought I'd give a quick summary of the mitochondria, which come up in pretty much all my videos. So remember that the mitochondria are tiny organelles. We have 1 quadrillion of them in our body, and they live inside the nucleus of our cells. And they have 2 membranes. Think of a big oval with a little oval shape inside it. The small oval shape on the inside is called the inner mitochondrial membrane, and inside that oval shape is the mitochondrial matrix, which is full of water. Then between the inner mitochondrial membrane and the outer mitochondrial membrane is the intermembrane space, and outside the outer mitochondrial membrane is the rest of the nucleus. And what happens is our mitochondria have an extraordinary amount of functions, but the main one it's known about is the production of energy, which is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So the mitochondria essentially take electrons from food and convert them into energy. Food is broken down, well, mainly carbohydrates and fat are the main fuel for the mitochondria, are broken down into glucose, and then the glucose goes through a process where it gets converted into electrons. So essentially, food is a supply of electrons for our mitochondria to produce energy. The other benefits or detriments of food are kind of side effects, byproducts of energy production. So the glucose goes into the mitochondria, then it gets converted into electrons. That's where NADH and things like that act as electron carriers. And those electrons are passed along the inner mitochondrial membrane of the mitochondria. They pass through 5 respiratory proteins. And as they pass through those respiratory proteins, the electrons passing through cause hydrogen or protons to be pumped from the mitochondrial matrix into the intermembrane space. So it keeps pumping hydrogens up into there. How important is that process? Well, that comes in with the rule of 3s in survival, which I often teach to junior doctors, and everybody kind of knows the rules that you can roughly survive 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen, but you can only survive about 3 seconds if the electron transport chain stops, because cyanide gas is a poison which drops the electron flow through the mitochondria, and you're deceased within about 3 seconds. So how important is mitochondrial function to our survival? Well, it's 3 seconds important. That's how important it is, compared to food, which is 3 weeks. Right, so we're busy using our electrons to pump hydrogen atoms into the intermitochondrial membrane. Then it's like any kind of balloon. The pressure gets so high in that intermembrane space that all the hydrogens basically suddenly explode back through. And when they explode back through across the membrane to get into the matrix again, they spin the 5th respiratory protein, which is all called ATPase, which basically spins at 5,000 rotations per second. And as it spins, it adds a phosphate to ADP, so ADP gets converted to ATP, which is our energy currency in the body. And of course, as we always discuss on those videos, not only does it produce ATP, but it also produces water, it produces light. Think about that for a minute, called biophotons. It produces pollution as free radicals, and it produces heat. That becomes relevant when we're talking about the cold water benefits of, well, the mitochondrial benefits of cold water immersion. Okay, so basically then electrons go in from food, pass along the chain, spin ATPase, you produce energy as ATP. Right, that's the mitochondrial summary. Let's first talk about the study, and I'll attach all the references to the 3 studies in the description of the video, and I'll put a screenshot in the video so you can go and research if you like. But of course, plastics are a huge problem in the environment now, and there was a recent study showing that baby seabirds are just being destroyed by the amount of plastics that they're being exposed to in the ocean surrounds. But it also turns out that the microplastics and the even smaller nanoplastics we've now found are starting to accumulate in our mitochondria. Now the mitochondria, one of the roles in mitochondria where there's a lot of interest these days is in longevity. So there's still a bit of debate about the exact mechanisms defining longevity, but we do know that certainly telomeres, certainly free radical production, antioxidants, and mitochondria are all involved to an extent. And the research is starting to suggest that mitochondria are the primary responsibility or cause of our longevity. So these nanoplastics and microplastics are getting into mitochondria, and they're disrupting that whole process that we just discussed about the electron transport chain and the respiratory proteins and the production of ATP from the mitochondria. So I'm really working hard on trying to minimize plastics as much as I can, because it's impossible to eliminate them completely, even if we really try, but really try and minimize as many plastic exposures as I can, because I want my mitochondria to function optimally. Otherwise I'm getting in saunas and cold icy pools for no reason. Okay, so that's the first study. So I try and avoid plastics as much as I can so that I optimize my mitochondrial function. The second study was about, let's talk about the benefits of Astragalus, which is one of the great medicinal herbs on the planet, up there with turmeric and ashwagandha. Traditionally used in traditional Chinese medicine is what it's most known for, and probably most known for its perhaps beneficial effect of extending the length or delaying the degradation of our telomeres, which protect our ends of our chromosomes. Right, let's get off the beaten track a little bit. See how much of the track is still intact after the cyclone. Okay, so Astragalus. So as you'll see at the end of the video, it's one of the herbs that I'm planting in my garden, where I'm getting rid of a whole lot of climbers on a steep bank and terracing it out to produce some medicinal herbs, particularly turmeric, ashwagandha and astragalus. And I'm going to take you on a little tour at the end of the video showing you that. And astragalus, as I said, traditionally known for its, well, immune effects, because it definitely boosts the immune system, and also its effect on telomeres. But this was a big paper which researched all the cardiovascular benefits of astragalus, and really they can be kind of convenient. Astragalus starting with an A. I've managed to summarize the benefits of astragalus on the heart into the 7 A's. Let me just climb across this and I'll be back to you. Oh, before I mention those 7 benefits, I was just thinking, you know, that a lot of you know, because of some events in my life, I've been in some really tight, tough places lately, and found myself in depths that I never thought that I would ever find myself in. And at times it's been a real struggle to get myself out of them. And that's until recently, when I've really kind of discovered a few things. And one of the things I discovered was that one of the reasons I was so down was that I've kind of, as I've said in these videos with the Carl Jung quote, you know, the world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. And I discovered that I really had stopped being who I truly am. And the other thing I discovered were there are kind of 3 places in the world where I kind of forget about all the difficulties in my life. Those turn out to be the wilderness, particularly places like this, waterfalls and empty beaches by the ocean. But I also discovered that places of worship, very powerful for me to just focus on myself and my place in the world, and also in my garden. I really do get a lot of enjoyment out of growing herbs and fruits and vegetables and then converting them to a usable form. So that's why you'll see at the end of the video what I've been doing and why astragalus is going to be a big feature of that. Oh, and this waterfall I'm heading to now, where I often come and get some cold water, particularly in winter, is so nice. If you ever get a chance to come up in the Currumbin Valley. It's not my favourite waterfall of all time. My favourite waterfall in all time is a secret one in Mount Tamborine in southeast Queensland, for a certain reason. But this one's really up there. All right, let me just cross this creek and we'll talk about the benefits of astragalus. But to begin, we'll briefly summarise what causes cardiovascular disease. And the simple answer is it's inflammation. So particularly for the vascular system and the arterial supply of the heart, it's caused by inflammation of those arteries. So the key with heart disease is work out what might be causing the inflammation. Because in the end, the body responds to the inflammation by laying down some glue, which is called calcium. So we get this layer of calcium, and then because the inflammation continues, get a layer of cholesterol which goes in there to try and heal it. Then you get layers of calcium, layers of damaged cholesterol, layers of calcium, layers of damaged cholesterol, which causes the narrowing of the arteries that we know as coronary artery disease. This is fun. Some trees down. Okay, so what does astragalus do? Well, there's 7 benefits of astragalus. They all start with A. So one is, and this is in the published study, one is it's an antioxidant. So oxidants are those things produced by our mitochondria. It's the pollution produced by our mitochondria. Although sometimes it's necessary, they can also cause damage. They are one of the things which can damage the vascular system. So it's an antioxidant. It's also an anti-inflammatory. Itself helps to reduce the inflammation in the arterial wall. It's an antiviral. It's well known to help with viral diseases, and we now know that infections like viruses are one of the causes of the inflammation of the arterial walls. Also increases ATP production from our mitochondria, gives us more energy, and ultimately every organ in our body, including our immune system and cardiac function, requires energy to work properly. So the heart cells get more energy. So we've got antiviral, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, increases ATP. It also is involved in angiogenesis, was the production of new blood vessels. Because I was just thinking as I was driving here, because we've had a lot of flooding recently, and the road from my place down here gets flooded very easily, except there is a back road I can take if the usual road gets flooded. Same thing with our coronary arteries. If one gets blocked, you want the others to be able to take over its function. And so angiogenesis is the production of new blood vessels supplying blood and oxygen to the cardiac muscles. Okay, angiogenesis, antiviral, ATP, what else have we got? Next A is apoptosis, which we've discussed in previous videos, which is kind of taking out of damaged cells so that can be replaced by new healthy cells. And the last A is arterial dilation. So I'll do videos on this coming up, but it's particularly about the production of nitrous oxide by our arterial system, which dilates blood vessels and gets more blood flow and oxygen to the muscle. So I'll put up a summary, lost my foot, put up a summary slide of that, but we've got antiviral, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, increased ATP production, angiogenesis, apoptosis, and arterial dilation. So those are the 7 benefits of Astragalus. Now Astragalus, the main and the medicinal benefit of Astragalus comes from the root, which is why, and also very important with herbs, knowing when to harvest them for the medicinal effect, because you'll find most of the medicinal products from plants will go into the roots over winter. So I'll be harvesting my Astragalus roots over winter, which is where they store most of the medicinal products to get them through the winter. All right, so we've talked about plastics and mitochondria. We've talked about Astragalus, which also includes mitochondria as one of its benefits. So finally, I'm going to talk about skin changes when we get into cold water. In fact, I'm going to do a more lengthy video purely on cold water immersion, because there's still lots of misinformation out there about the benefits of getting in cold water, for how long, when, why, how. So I'll do a video on that. But it's interesting because I've noted sometimes when I get in really cold water, the first thing that happens is that my skin gets really pale. And what's happening there is that the small arteries in my skin are vasoconstricting, because they want to make sure most of my warm blood goes to my vital organs, and also helps reduce the cooling of the blood because it's pumped away from the skin, which is in contact with the cold water. Make sure most of the blood supply goes to my vital organs. But after a certain amount of time, usually 5, 10, 15 minutes, the body in its infinite wisdom decides that it's great that my vital organs are staying alive and getting lots of blood supply, but I don't want my skin becoming necrotic and falling off. That's a bad look. So I better flip the switch occasionally and make sure I pump some of that blood for a short time back to my skin to keep it healthy while I'm in the cold water. In fact, that turns out to be one of the benefits of cold water exposure that we'll talk about, which is that constant vasodilation, vasoconstriction. But we'll save that for another video, especially while I try and clamber over these fallen trees. Well, that's pretty hilarious. As you can see, the environment has changed. But I didn't get to the waterfall in the end. It was starting to get too dark and it was going to take too long to get through those fallen trees. So I have to go out earlier next time. So what did we discuss today? We discussed how micro and nanoplastics are gumming up our mitochondria and potentially reducing our longevity. We talked about the cardiovascular benefits of the famous herb Astragalus, and we talked about how the inherent wisdom of the body in doing the vasoconstriction, vasodilation in cold water to ensure the maximum survival of our vital organs as well as our skin. And now finally, I'm starting to turn my tiny backyard into a herbarium and a kind of medicinal fruit orchard. So each time I do a video, I might give you a little progress report on what's happening. As I said, I'm going to the main herbs, or you'll see me say I'm doing the main herbs I'm growing are Astragalus, turmeric, ginger, and ashwagandha. And I'm also growing pomegranate and amla berry as my main fruits, and also ruby grapefruit. So you better watch the progress of that. I'm also doing a course in spagyrics, which is how to convert your usual herbal tinctures into using alchemical principles into more potent herbal preparations. So I'll be doing some reporting on that. All right, well, that's enough from me today. Don't forget the Navy SEAL quote: doesn't matter how much it hurts, how dark it gets, or how far you fall, you are never out of the fight. Don't give up. With much peace and love from the Australian outback, I'll see you next week. Pomegranate, aloe vera, pomegranate, 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 ruby grapefruit, sapote, aloe vera and all their children getting replanted, cyclone repair, and the Great Wall of Climbers, which is slowly coming out and going to be terraced and planted with herbs. It's a dwarf ruby orange that I put in, which I love. But yeah, that's all going to be terraced herbs and some dwarf fruit trees. Climbers, this place loves climbers. Kind of like they grow everywhere and strangle everything else. Kind of like certain cells in your body which mutate and then start to grow and take over everything else. So they're coming out, going to be replaced by medicinal herbs, particularly Astragalus going to go there, ashwagandha. I'll plant some amla fruit, turmeric of course, and ginger. Those will be the main herbs to start off with. So it's my passion to kind of use the little land I've got to convert into food forest and herb garden to make herbal tinctures and spagyrics out of. So you better follow along on that journey with me as we slowly start to transform this tiny little area of paradise that I live on.